No one would buy her, abandoned without clothes in a Wild West market, until a cowboy saw her.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The wind carried dust across the frontier market in long, thin currents that shifted the ground with every step people took. The late afternoon light gave the square a tired look, the kind that settled in at the end of a long week. Wagons sat half-loaded. Crates lay open but untouched. A handful of children kicked stones near the trough while their parents stood nearby, pretending to browse. No one wanted to stay longer than necessary. The air felt tense in a way that didn't need to be spoken. Near the edge of the square, she stood alone. Her feet were planted firmly on the uneven planks, though her legs felt weak from hours of being left there. A thin blanket covered her front, but hung loose on one side, barely keeping the cold off her skin. The vendor responsible for bringing her had walked away hours earlier, leaving her behind without explanation. She still had no idea where he went or whether he planned to return. She kept her head steady, refusing to show how nervous she felt, because the few times she glanced toward the crowd, people either looked away quickly or stared with mild amusement. She tried to calm her breathing, counting slowly, but fear stayed under her ribs like a steady weight. She didn't know who might claim her, or if anyone would bother. Shame pushed deeper than the cold. She tightened her grip on the blanket, because it was the only thing she could control. Across the square, a man stepped down from his mare. Adam always moved with quiet purpose. His boots hit the ground with a heavy sound, the mark of someone used to long days alone. He scanned the area, taking note of the partially dismantled stalls and the tired expressions on the vendors' faces. He didn't come often unless he ran out of something important, and even then, he preferred to get what he needed and leave as quickly as possible. He carried a past he didn't talk about, family lost to circumstances he rarely let himself revisit. Life alone on his land kept his thoughts organized, his days predictable, and his mind steady. He came to town searching for a few tools and a new sack of grain. Nothing more. He intended to be back at his cabin before sunset. But as he crossed the center of the market, he noticed the way people stiffened slightly and then redirected their attention toward the far end. Their sudden quietness made him look too. He saw her. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground directly in front of her, avoiding faces, avoiding questions she couldn't answer. Her expression held exhaustion, but her posture wasn't collapsed. She tried not to let herself shake from the cold, but her fingers tightened again and again around the blanket, giving away the strain she was under. Adam didn't approach immediately. He stood still, analyzing the situation the way he always did when confronted with something unexpected. He noticed her bare feet, the marks on her arms, the hollow look around her eyes that came from days of worry layered on top of hunger. He also noticed that no one else looked capable of taking responsibility for her. Most people kept a safe distance, as if she carried trouble no one wanted to deal with. A vendor stacking crates finally muttered, "Seller, dropped her off. Try to get rid of her." Folks said no. Then he left. Adam took in the information with a slow breath. He didn't rush toward her, but he felt the familiar pull of responsibility in his chest, the same instinct that used to guide him before grief pushed him into isolation. He stepped closer. Her eyes flicked upward briefly, enough to register the approach of another stranger. She didn't back away, but her shoulders tightened, readying herself for whatever he might say. His face was calm, unreadable, but not threatening. Her heart beat faster anyway. "Cold?" he asked. She didn't trust her voice. She only nodded once, small and controlled. Adam removed his coat. It was heavy, lined with wool, worn at the collar from years of long winters. He held it out to her with one steady hand. She hesitated. He didn't force it. He waited. When she finally reached forward and touched the fabric, her hand brushed his for a moment. Her fingers were ice cold. She pulled the coat around her shoulders with a shaky breath she tried to hide. Before she could speak, the vendor came running back. "Thinking of taking her?" he asked, tone flat, almost bored. "If you're serious, pay, and she's yours. If not, move on." The vendor's bluntness made her stomach knot. She stared at the coat rather than Adam's face, afraid of hearing the wrong answer. Adam reached into his pocket, counted out the required coins, and set them on the nearest crate. He didn't negotiate. He didn't ask for details. He didn't look at the vendor again after handing over the payment. Then he turned to her. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Her throat tightened. She nodded again. Adam helped her toward the horse, guiding her with minimal contact. She climbed onto the saddle slowly, her body stiff from standing for so long. He adjusted the coat so it covered her better, then took the reins and started toward the road without making a spectacle of the moment. On the ride out of town, she kept her eyes on the horizon. She tried to understand why he didn't ask her who she was or what happened, but she also felt relief at the silence. He didn't push. He didn't judge. He simply led his mare forward at a steady pace that didn't jolt her. Adam walked beside the horse rather than riding. It gave him time to think. He didn't know her story, but he could see she had survived something difficult. Her guarded eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she stayed alert even while exhausted. These were signs he recognized from people who had been abandoned by those they depended on. He also felt the old instinct rising again, the one he tried not to acknowledge, that urge to protect someone who had no reason to trust the world anymore. By the time they reached his land, the sky had deepened into evening. The cabin sat alone on a small rise, its roof slanted, its chimney still faintly warm from the morning fire. She looked at it with a mixture of curiosity and fear, unsure what waited inside. Adam opened the door and stepped aside. She hesitated only a moment before entering. The interior was simple: a bed against the far wall, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with tools and tins of food. Everything was clean but plainly used. The room felt controlled, orderly, and lived in. He pointed to the wash basin, then the bed, then the chair near the stove. She watched every gesture carefully, trying to see whether there were rules she needed to follow. Adam didn't speak unless necessary. "I'll bring water," he said. She nodded, clutching the coat closer. While he stepped outside, she sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress dip slightly beneath her weight. She looked around the cabin, trying to understand what kind of man brought a stranger home without demanding anything in return. Her fear didn't disappear, but it softened just enough for her to breathe. Outside, Adam carried the bucket back toward the steps, thinking about the responsibility he had just taken on. He didn't regret the choice, but he understood its weight. He wasn't bringing home trouble. He was bringing home someone who had been left without a choice. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the quiet shift of purpose return to him. The cabin door closed softly behind them, marking the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both had needed for longer than they would admit. The cabin door closed with a muted thud behind them, muffling the distant sounds of the open land. Inside, the air held a faint mix of wood smoke, old pine, and iron from the tools hanging neatly along the far wall. She stood near the threshold, keeping her weight balanced, as if ready to move again if something felt wrong. The coat hung heavily around her shoulders, warming her skin but not yet calming the unease building in her stomach. She felt safer than she had in days, but trust did not come as quickly as shelter. Adam set the water bucket beside the stove and struck a match. The dry kindling caught immediately, sending a soft glow across the room. He preferred a warm cabin before dark, and tonight the need felt stronger with someone else inside. He didn't try to speak to her. He understood she needed time to adjust, and too many words often made things worse. His own mind was busy sorting through the sudden shift in his routine, but there was no regret in his chest, only the steady weight of responsibility. She moved closer to the fire, keeping her steps small and quiet. Her hands slipped free of the coat, long enough to extend toward the rising warmth. The heat stung her fingers at first, and she curled them slightly, letting sensation return slowly. Her shoulders loosened, but her eyes kept drifting around the cabin, mapping exits, measuring distance, learning the space in the way someone does when survival has been their only priority for too long. Adam retrieved a tin bowl from the shelf above the stove and filled it with leftover stew. He placed the bowl on the table without ceremony, then stepped back to give her room. She hesitated, trying to gauge whether accepting the food created an obligation. Hunger eventually pushed her toward the chair, and she sat with careful posture, spooning the warm broth in her mouth in steady, controlled movements. She didn't speak while eating, and Adam didn't interrupt the silence. As she ate, Adam leaned against the counter, arms relaxed at his sides. He watched the fire, not her, giving her privacy despite sharing the same small room. His thoughts drifted, not to her past, which he knew nothing about, but to the simple fact that she needed rest, food, and space. He had seen people break under far lighter burdens. She wasn't broken. She was holding herself together with a discipline he recognized. When she finished half the bowl, she pushed it forward slightly, unsure whether she was allowed more. Adam nodded once. "If you want the rest, take it." His tone was straightforward, not soft, but steady enough to sound safe. She finished the bowl without rushing. After clearing the table, Adam retrieved a folded blanket from a trunk at the foot of the bed. He placed it beside the mattress, then stepped back. She watched him carefully, prepared to react if he made a claim over the space. But he simply walked to the opposite side of the room and pulled a chair closer to the stove. "You sleep there," he said, voice even. Her breath caught with a mix of surprise and relief. She pulled the blanket over her legs and slowly lay down. The mattress felt strange, too soft after days of rough ground, too stable after the unsteady jolts of travel. Fatigue pulled at her limbs, but her mind stayed alert, listening to every shift in the cabin. Adam removed his boots and set them neatly near the door. He sat in the chair, resting one arm on the table. His breathing settled quickly, controlled and calm. He didn't turn down the lamp completely, leaving a dim glow so she wouldn't wake in darkness. He had learned, long ago, that sudden dark made frightened people more uneasy. She watched him from the edge of the blanket, expecting questions that never came. Her past sat heavy in her chest, but he didn't ask her to explain anything. The absence of interrogation felt strange. Nearly everyone she had met wanted details, names, reasons, mistakes. Adam wanted none of it, and that unsettled her more than any threat could have. As minutes turned into an hour, her thoughts eased. The coat, draped across her shoulders, still carried the faint scent of dry earth and leather, grounding her. Her eyelids grew heavier, and the room's warmth finally quieted the ache in her bones. She fought sleep at first, worried about letting herself drift in a stranger's house, but exhaustion won. When she drifted off, Adam noticed. He didn't move for a long while, watching the fire instead of the woman who had fallen asleep under his roof. He felt the familiar pull of old memories surface, times when he had shared a home with someone he cared about, but he pushed them aside. The past had no place here yet. Outside, the wind slowed, brushing gently against the cabin walls. Inside, her breathing settled into a steady pattern. Adam closed his eyes only when he was sure she had fully fallen asleep. It was the quietest night either of them had experienced in months, and for the first time in a long time, neither felt entirely alone. A thin line of dawn light crept across the cabin floor before either of them moved. The fire had burned down to soft embers, leaving the room dim but warm enough to keep the cold from settling in. She woke first, her breathing tightening for a moment as she tried to remember where she was. The familiar panic rose, but it faded quickly when she saw the coat draped across her chest and the steady rise and fall of Adam's shoulders on the other side of the room. He was asleep in the chair, head tilted slightly forward, one hand resting loosely near the stove. It struck her that he had stayed awake longer than she realized, guarding the space without making it obvious. The thought unsettled her and comforted her in equal measure. She sat up slowly, careful not to make noise, letting her feet touch the wooden floor. Her muscles ached from days of strain, but the pain felt tolerable now that she wasn't standing outside in the cold. Adam's eyes opened a few moments later. He didn't startle or shift suddenly. He just lifted his gaze toward her and offered a small nod. There was no expectation in the gesture, only acknowledgement. "You can use the basin," he said quietly. She walked toward the wash basin with careful steps, noticing how the morning light showed the dust in the air and the worn edges on the furniture. The cabin felt lived in, not neglected. Every item seemed placed for function rather than decoration. A stack of clean cloths sat near the water bucket, and she chose one, dipping it lightly before washing the dirt from her face and neck. The cool water cleared her mind, grounding her. Adam slipped his boots on and stepped outside without another word. She watched the door close with a click, then let her breath out slowly. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't being watched or ordered to move. The silence inside the cabin felt strangely safe. Outside, Adam fed the horse and checked the fence line with practiced efficiency. He liked starting his day with tasks. They kept his thoughts steady and prevented old memories from taking over. Today felt different, though. He wasn't used to someone waiting inside his home. He felt responsible for her safety, but also uncertain about what she needed beyond food and rest. He decided he would let her show him at her own pace. When he returned, she was standing near the table, hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't sure whether she should sit or wait for permission, so she remained still. Adam set a small loaf of bread and a tin of dried fruit on the table. She watched his movements, trying to read the routine. He cut the bread in half and slid one piece toward her. "Eat," he said simply. She obeyed, but slowly. Each bite eased the tension in her shoulders. She didn't rush the meal, wanting to understand whether this was a one-time kindness or something she could rely on for more than a night. Adam ate quietly, neither hurried nor casual, just steady. After breakfast, he grabbed his tools and opened the door. "I need to fix the hinge on the barn," he said, not giving instructions, but offering information she didn't expect. She hesitated. "Do you want me to stay inside?" "Do whatever feels right," he answered. The unexpected freedom made her pause. She had grown used to being told where to stand, when to move, how to behave. Having a choice felt foreign. After thinking for a moment, she followed Adam outside, staying a few paces behind him, not wanting to intrude. The morning air bit lightly at her cheeks, but the sun promised warmth later. Adam knelt beside the barn door, testing the loose hinge. She watched him work, noticing how deliberate his movements were, never rushed, never careless. He didn't speak while repairing the wood, but his silence didn't feel heavy. It felt practical, wanting to contribute something. She scanned the yard and noticed a pile of scattered kindling near the porch. She began gathering the pieces into a neat stack, working slowly but with purpose. Adam glanced over once, saw what she was doing, and returned to his repair without comment. The lack of criticism eased her nerves. By midday, the yard looked tidier and the barn door moved smoothly on its hinge. She wiped her hands on her trousers, feeling more grounded than she had since the day she was taken from her former life. Her body still felt fragile, but her mind felt steadier. Adam filled a bucket with fresh water from the well and offered her the first drink. She accepted, lifting the tin cup carefully. The cold water soothed the dryness in her throat, and she lowered the cup with a quiet exhale. "You're stronger than you look," Adam said, not as flattery, but as a simple observation. She swallowed, unsure how to respond. Compliments had never meant much to her, but his tone felt genuine, not manipulative. "I'm trying," she replied. He gave another small nod, accepting her answer without judgment. As the sun climbed higher, she walked a few steps away from the cabin, testing the boundaries. No one called her back. No one blocked her way. She could see the whole valley from the slight rise behind the cabin. Wide, open land stretching out with no signs of men who wanted to claim or trade her. The sight made her chest ache with relief. She stood there for a long moment, letting the wind brush past her. It wasn't warm, but it didn't feel threatening either. Adam watched her from the barn doorway. He didn't interrupt. He understood what it meant to stand somewhere without fear for the first time in a long while. That afternoon, she carried a bucket of water inside and set it near the stove. Adam noticed the choice she made to help and didn't take it for granted. He simply said, "Good," and she felt a small sense of accomplishment that surprised her. By the time evening approached, the cabin felt different, not just because she had slept there, but because she had moved through the day without waiting for danger. She wasn't safe yet, Not fully. But she wasn't trapped either. And that alone was enough to change the way she stepped across the room, the way she held her shoulders, and the way she saw the man who had brought her home without asking for anything in return. Tomorrow would be different again. She knew it. And for the first time in months, she didn't dread what daylight might bring. The fourth morning arrived with a sharp brightness that filled the cabin sooner than she expected. Sunlight pushed through the single window, landing across the bed and illuminating the dust that drifted in slow, loose patterns above the floorboards. She blinked against the light and sat upright, surprised at how deeply she had slept. Her body still felt sore, but the constant panic that had lived inside her chest for so long seemed weaker today, almost distant. Adam was already awake. He stood near the small shelf beside the stove, sorting tools with quiet precision. He checked each item as if judging whether it still served its purpose. His movements were steady but tense, like a man who relied on routine to keep unwanted thoughts away. When he noticed her watching, he didn't greet her. He simply nodded and continued working. His silence felt neither cold nor inviting. It felt honest. She rose carefully, adjusting the coat around her shoulders. The fabric was heavier today, its warmth more comforting than it had been the night before. She stepped toward the basin, washed her face, and combed her fingers through her hair until the worst tangles were gone. These simple tasks steadied her nerves, helping her claim the morning as something she could manage. Adam stepped outside to check the weather, leaving the door slightly open so air could move freely through the space. She gathered the thin blanket from the bed, folded it neatly, and placed it at the foot of the mattress. She didn't know why she felt compelled to keep the cabin orderly, but the act calmed her. When Adam returned, he carried a bucket of fresh water and a small cloth sack. "Got this from a barn," he said, placing the sack on the table. "Dried apples. Should hold you until harvest." She studied his face, trying to understand whether he was offering food or reassurance. His expression remained unreadable, though his tone was steady. She took one of the slices and chewed slowly, surprised by how sweet it tasted. He didn't watch her eat. He lit the stove instead, adding 2 pieces of wood and adjusting the air vent until the flame caught properly. Only after a long pause did she speak. "You didn't ask me anything." Adam's hand froze on the stove handle. He turned slightly, giving her his attention without stepping closer. Didn't see the need. Most people in her past had demanded answers before offering help. The absence of interrogation unsettled her, leaving her unsure how much of her story she should reveal. "I had a name," she said softly, though her voice carried an edge of hesitation, "but not one they used." He didn't push. "You can tell me when you're ready." Her chest tightened with relief she didn't expect. She wasn't ready to say the name out loud. Not because she feared judgment, but because she feared attaching herself to a life she no longer understood. Adam picked up a hammer and stepped outside to deal with a loose board on the porch. The sound of metal striking would echoed through the quiet valley. She followed him out, standing near the doorway while he secured the plank. When he finished, he brushed dust from his hands and looked toward the distant ridge. "You planning to leave?" he asked, not with suspicion but simple practicality. She lowered her eyes. "I don't know where I'd go." "That's an answer," he replied. His voice held no pressure, just acknowledgement. She felt something shift between them. Not closeness, not yet, but a clearer sense of where she stood. He wasn't holding her here. He was letting her decide. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby slope. She turned her face into the breeze, letting it cool her skin. Adam watched her quietly, noting the slight relaxation in her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said. The words landed deeper than he probably intended. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Safety had been a fleeting concept in her previous life, appearing only in brief moments before fading again. Inside the cabin later that afternoon, she tidied the shelves, placing jars in neat rows. She worked slowly, wanting to keep her hands busy while she sorted through the emotions rising in her chest. She realized she felt less like a burden today, more like someone who had the right to stand in the room. As she moved a small stack of folded cloths, Adam entered carrying a bundle of firewood. She stepped aside instinctively, allowing him space. He paused long enough to speak. "You're learning the place." She nodded. "Trying to." He placed the wood near the stove and leaned one hand on the table, studying her with a quiet steadiness. "You don't have to earn your place here," he said. "You're not here because I expect something." She hadn't known how much she needed to hear those words until they were spoken. That evening, they sat at the table eating stew she had reheated for both of them. The silence felt less heavy, more like the kind shared by people adapting to each other's presence. When she lifted her eyes, he met them without flinching. "I don't know what name I'll use," she confessed, "but I'll tell you when I decide." Adam nodded once, accepting her pace. The fire burned steady in the stove, sending a soft glow over the room. She lay down that night with fewer shadows in her mind, aware that something fragile but real had begun forming between them. Not trust yet, but the beginning of it. The next morning arrived with a cold draft slipping beneath the door, nudging her awake before the sun fully reached the window. She sat up, pulling the coat closer around her shoulders, surprised at how her body had begun to adjust to the unfamiliar bed. The mattress no longer felt foreign. Her breathing came easier than it had in days, and the tightness in her chest from constant fear had loosened into something manageable. She stood, steadying herself before walking toward the basin to wash. Ada was outside, splitting wood. The steady rhythm of the axe, striking the log, created a pulse through the yard that matched the calm tone of the morning. She watched him from the doorway for a moment, observing the way he worked with consistent force, not rushing, not hesitating. He didn't look back at her, but she could tell he knew she was there. His awareness never seemed to lapse, yet he never acted as though she was a threat or an obligation. She stepped fully outside, letting the cold sharpness of the air wake her fully. The valley stretched out in long, quiet lines, the land still untouched by movement. The world felt bigger here, but not hostile. She walked toward the woodpile with careful steps. Her legs were steadier today, and she wanted to prove to herself that she could carry more than fear. Without being asked, she began gathering small branches and stacking them beside the cabin wall. The work grounded her, giving her something simple and productive to focus on. Adam paused his chopping long enough to glance in her direction. He didn't comment, but the slight shift of his posture hinted at approval. He set another log upright and split it cleanly down the center. The smooth precision of the swing reminded her that he spent most of his days doing chores alone, managing every task without help. Now she was adding small parts to his routine, and he allowed it without question. Inside, she prepared the stove for breakfast, arranging kindling exactly as she had watched him do the day before. When she lit the match, the flame caught quickly, surprising her with how easily it worked. She felt a small spark of accomplishment, one she didn't allow herself to show on her face. She heated a pot of water and placed it on the stove, unsure whether Adam expected coffee or tea, but wanting the space to feel ready for the day. When Adam entered, he brushed the cold from his sleeves and inhaled the warm air. "You lit the fire," he said, not with surprise, but noticing the shift in responsibility. She nodded. "I can learn." "You are learning," he answered. They shared a quiet breakfast of bread and warm water with a few dried apples. She ate more confidently this time, her appetite returning with strange insistence. Adam didn't stare or hover. He ate with the same measured pace he used for everything else, occasionally glancing toward the window to check the weather. After the meal, he stood and retrieved a rope from the shelf. "Fence needs fixing," he said. "I'm heading out back." She rose before thinking it through. "Can I help?" He studied her for a moment, not doubting her ability, but assessing whether she was offering out of pressure or desire. When he saw a spark of determination in her expression, he nodded once. "Bring the bucket of nails." She followed him behind the cabin, carrying the bucket with both hands. The weight strained her arms, but she refused to set it down early. Adam noticed her struggling, but didn't rush to take over. He wanted to see how far she would push herself, not because he demanded labor, but because he understood the importance of reclaiming capability. They reached the fence line where a portion had shifted from a recent storm. Adam knelt and tested the boards. "Hold this steady," he said, positioning one plank in her direction. She gripped it tightly, bracing herself while he hammered the nails one by one. Her hands trembled slightly under the strain, but she never let go. By the time they finished, her arms ached, and sweat cooled along her back despite the cold morning air. She straightened slowly, breathing deeply. Adam stepped back to review their work. "You did fine," he said. The compliment unsettled her, not because it was unkind, but because she wasn't used to praise that didn't serve an ulterior motive. She lowered her eyes briefly, uncertain how to respond. "Thank you," she managed. They walked back toward the cabin together, not close enough to touch, but close enough to share the same pace. She realized she no longer walked behind him. She walked beside him. Inside, she warmed her hands near the stove. Her body ached, but it was a good ache, earned, honest, and fully her own. She had worked, contributed, and been seen without judgment. Adam wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against the table. She caught him studying her, not with suspicion, but with quiet evaluation. He seemed to recognize something shifting in her, something he wasn't trying to control. "You're stronger than you think," he said. A small breath escaped her, almost a laugh, but not quite. "I don't feel strong." "You will," Adam replied. The statement landed firmly in her chest, not as comfort, but as truth. Later, she stepped outside again to feel the wind on her face. The air tasted clean, and the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt open. She looked toward the distant ridge and realized she was no longer waiting for someone to come for her. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't property. She wasn't a burden. She was a person living through the first quiet morning she'd had in years. And Adam, without saying it directly, had given her permission to exist without fear. A colder wind swept across the valley the next morning, carrying the sharp scent of pine and distant moisture. The chill pressed against the cabin walls in a steady, whispering rhythm. She woke slowly, blinking at the dim light, unsure for a moment if the tightening in her chest came from fear or the temperature. When she sat up, she realized it was neither. It was the unfamiliar weight of remembering she was safe enough to feel tired instead of terrified. Adam was already outside. His boots made muted impressions in the thin layer of frost that had settled overnight. He walked the fence line with cautious steps, scanning the ground for signs of predators or loose boards. He had learned to read the land the way some people read books, carefully, noting every detail. Today, he wanted to ensure nothing threatened the fragile stability forming inside the cabin. She watched him from the window while pulling the coat around her shoulders. She wasn't studying him out of suspicion anymore. She was trying to understand the rhythm of his life, his movements, routines, and silences. She wanted to know what kind of man she was now relying on. Once she felt ready, she stepped outside, letting the frosty air hit her face. The cold stung, but the sensation grounded her. Adam turned when he heard the door close. "Morning," he said with a quiet firmness. She nodded. "It's colder today. Storm passed north last night." "Just catching the edge of it," he replied, scanning the distant ridges again. She followed his gaze and saw how far the land stretched, how empty the valley remained except for small patches of brush and the faint shape of wildlife tracks. The openness of it all made her feel small, yet strangely calmer than she had in towns crowded with noise and danger. Back inside, she heated water over the stove. The warmth rising from the pot made her fingers tingle. She had grown comfortable performing these small tasks, even though she still felt the urge to check Adam's expression after each one. He didn't criticize or hover. He simply moved around her with the cautious patience of a man who understood broken routines and fragile boundaries. After they finished a quiet breakfast, Adam brought in a bundle of tools and placed them on the table. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for an explanation. "I'm mending the roof," he said. Wind loosened 2 shingles. She hesitated before answering. "Do you need help?" Adam studied her for a moment. He wasn't weighing her capability. He was gauging her intent. When he saw no fear behind the question, he nodded. "Hold the ladder steady." They walked to the back of the cabin. The ground was slightly damp from the frost melt, making the earth soft beneath her boots. She positioned herself at the base of the ladder, gripping both sides with steady hands. Adam climbed carefully, tools secured at his belt. She watched him work, noticing how controlled he was with every motion. While he hammered the loose shingles back into place, she found her thoughts drifting, something she hadn't allowed herself to do in a long time. She remembered being sold from one hand to another, always expected to obey, never expected to speak. The silence she carried wasn't natural, it was forced. Now, standing here holding a ladder for a man who hadn't asked her to be anything but present, she felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. She didn't know how to belong anywhere, yet this place didn't push her away. When Adam finished, he descended the ladder and dusted off his hands. She didn't step back until he nodded that he was done. His approval wasn't loud or enthusiastic, but it felt solid. Inside the cabin later that morning, she sat at the table, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. She felt something building in her chest, a pressure that wasn't fear, but the weight of unsaid truth. Adam noticed the change in her demeanor. "You all right?" he asked. She looked at him, not quickly, but deliberately. "I should tell you something." Adam pulled out a chair across from her, giving her space yet showing he was listening. "Say what you need to." Her fingers tightened around the fabric of the coat. "I was taken away from my family when I was young. Moved around for years. I never belonged anywhere. They used me, passed me to anyone who wanted cheap labor." Her voice dropped. Or worse, Adam didn't interrupt. His jaw tightened slightly, but his gaze stayed steady. "They kept changing my name," she continued. "It stopped feeling like it belonged to me. That's why I haven't told you." She swallowed hard. "I don't know which one is mine anymore." Adam leaned forward, resting his hands lightly on the table. "You don't have to rush that decision." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away before they could fall. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. The act of sharing even a fraction of her story made her feel exposed, but Adam didn't respond with pity. He responded with quiet acceptance. "You can start over," he added. "Choose a name when you're ready. Or not at all." His tone carried no pressure, only sincerity. It steadied her more than she expected. The rest of the day unfolded with a calmer pace. She cleaned the shelves, organizing the jars by size and content. Adam repaired a broken handle on a tool he'd been avoiding for weeks. Their movements didn't overlap much, yet the cabin felt less divided than before. In the evening, they sat near the fire again. She wrapped her hands around a warm cup Adam had handed her, appreciating the heat that eased the stiffness in her fingers. The fire crackled softly, illuminating her face in gentle light. "I don't know what I'll choose," she said suddenly, staring at the stove. "But I want it to be mine." Adam nodded once. "When you pick it, I'll use it." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she let the quiet settle between them. It wasn't tense. It wasn't empty. It felt like something forming, a fragile beginning, a small step toward healing, and a sign that her past no longer defined every part of her. The seventh morning opened with a softer sky, pale blue spreading over the valley without the sharp, cold edge of the previous days. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the coat tight around her as she took in the quiet stretch of land. The frost had eased overnight, leaving only a thin sheen of moisture across the dirt. The air still held a bite, but the kind that woke the senses instead of threatening them. She breathed in slowly, steadying herself. Adam stood near the corral, checking the mare's legs for any signs of strain. He had already brushed the horse down, a routine he rarely broke. The mare nickered softly when she saw the woman approach, recognizing her presence from the previous morning's gentle touch. The sight made the woman pause, surprised that even the animal seemed to accept her existence here. "You sleep all right?" Adam asked without turning, his tone low and casual. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Better than before." "That's something," he replied. She watched him work for a moment, noting how his hands moved with practiced ease. He didn't waste effort. He didn't rush. Everything he did was measured, as if the world could fall apart if he stopped paying attention. A part of her understood that instinct far too well. Inside the cabin afterward, she prepared a simple meal, bread warmed on the stove, dried fruit, a small portion of leftover stew. Her movements had become more confident, not because she felt ownership over the space, but because she no longer felt like an intruder. She placed the bowl on the table for Adam before taking her seat. He joined her a moment later, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You didn't have to start breakfast," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. He nodded once, taking the bowl. The exchange was small, but something about it felt different. She felt it too, a subtle shift that neither dared acknowledge outright. After eating, they stepped outside together. The mild sunlight cast long shadows across the yard. Adam pointed toward a loose section of fencing along the western side of the property. "Wind pulled some boards free. I'll need to reinforce them today." She hesitated only briefly. "Show me how to help." Adam studied her expression for signs of doubt. When he found none, he gestured for her to follow. They walked toward the fence line at a steady pace, neither rushing nor slowing unnecessarily. She noticed how he adjusted his stride slightly so she wouldn't fall behind. At the fence, Adam demonstrated how to hold the plank at the right height. "Keep your grip firm. Don't lock your elbows." She followed his instructions with careful attention. The wood felt rough beneath her fingertips, but the physical effort grounded her. Adam hammered the nails into place with quick, controlled strikes. Each hit echoed through the quiet valley. When the board finally settled flush against the post, she exhaled with a mix of relief and pride. "You're getting the hang of it," he said. The comment caught her off guard. "You think so? You're learning fast." A small warmth settled in her chest. Unexpected, steady, and welcome. They continued working down the line, replacing boards and securing loose nails. Sweat gathered at her temples despite the cool air. She didn't complain about the strain, and Adam didn't hover or correct her unnecessarily. He trusted her to manage her part. That trust felt heavier than any board she lifted. When the fence was finished, they stopped near the barn to rest. She leaned against the wall, breathing deeply while Adam drank from a tin cup. He offered it to her, and she accepted without hesitation. The water was cold and refreshing, easing the dryness in her throat. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked, lowering the cup. Adam paused, considering the question. He rarely discussed his past, not because it was painful to speak, but because he never saw the point. Today felt different. "Lost people I cared about," he said plainly. After that, keeping to myself made things simpler. She studied his face, realizing this was the most he had shared since the day they met. His eyes held no bitterness, only quiet endurance. She respected the restraint it took to say even that much. "I understand losing things," she said quietly. He looked at her then, not with pity, but recognition. "You don't have to tell me more unless you want to." "I know," she replied. They stood in silence for a while, letting the sounds of the valley fill the space. A hawk circled high above. The mare grazed lazily near the corral. The wind brushed against their clothes with a gentler touch than the days before. Later, inside the cabin, she helped tidy the shelves and replace the firewood. Adam moved around her with an ease that hadn't existed before. Their steps no longer collided. Their movements fit naturally in the small space. While she worked, she noticed Adam watching her with a thoughtful expression. Not invasive, not possessive, but attentive. As if he was slowly accepting that her presence wasn't a temporary disruption. When evening arrived, the two of them sat near the fire again, but closer than the night before. She rested her hands on her lap, feeling the warmth reach her arms. Adam leaned slightly back in his chair, relaxing in a way she hadn't seen until now. "You're stronger every day," he said. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the praise, but grateful. "I'm trying to be. You're succeeding." The steady tone of his voice made her heartbeat quicken, not out of fear, but because she had never been spoken to with genuine respect before. When she lay down that night, she realized she no longer felt like a guest unsure of her place. She wasn't ready to call this home, but she didn't feel trapped or temporary either. She felt one in a quiet, honest way. And Adam, without announcing it, had already made room for her in parts of his life he thought he'd closed long ago. A thin layer of cloud covered the sky the next morning, softening the light that spilled across the valley. The air felt calm, almost expectant, as she stepped outside to sweep the porch. The broom scratched lightly against the wooden boards, pushing dust into neat lines. She moved with quiet determination, wanting to keep the space clean, not out of obligation, but because she finally felt invested in its order. Each stroke of the broom helped her reclaim parts of herself she thought were long gone. Adam emerged from the barn carrying a small crate of tools. His boots left distinct prints in the damp soil. He paused when he saw her working. She didn't notice his gaze at first, focused on the steady rhythm of her task. But when she did, she straightened instinctively. Instead of stepping back or apologizing, she held the broom upright and met his eyes. He gave a short nod, acknowledging her effort with a quiet approval that didn't need words. "I'm going to mend the gate today," he said. Winds loosened the hinges again. She leaned the broom against the wall. "Show me what to do." He studied her for a moment, not questioning her ability. The hesitation he once had about overwhelming her had faded as she continued to show strength in ways that surprised him. He motioned for her to follow, and together they walked across the yard. The gate sagged slightly to one side, held by nails that had begun to pull free from the repeated tension of storms. Adam kneeled to assess the damage, and she crouched beside him, watching intently. He explained the problem, pointing to each weakened piece of wood. She nodded, absorbing every detail. "Hold this steady," Adam said as he aligned a new plank. She braced her hands against the wood, anchoring her feet firmly in the soil. Her arms trembled from the strain, but she didn't complain. She watched Adam hammer each nail with controlled force, the sound echoing across the valley in clean, sharp beats. When the final hinge tightened, she let out a slow breath. The gate swung smoothly when Adam tested it. She allowed herself a small smile, proud of their work. Adam noticed the shift in her expression and lingered on it longer than he intended. "You've got good instincts," he said. She looked down, embarrassed but pleased. "I like fixing things. Makes me feel useful." "You're more than useful," he replied. The words hit deeper than he expected. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. No one had spoken to her in a way that recognized her capability without twisting it for their own gain. They returned to the cabin, and she set about preparing lunch. Her movements in the kitchen were no longer hesitant. She reached for pots and utensils with familiarity, understanding where everything belonged. Adam cleaned his tools at the table, his presence steady but relaxed. The silences between them had become calmer, no longer filled with tension or uncertainty. When she placed the bowl of stew in front of him, he looked up and held her gaze longer than usual. "Smells good. Hope it tastes all right," she said quietly. "It will." His confidence in her cooking startled her more than it should have. After eating, they stepped outside again to bring water from the well. She carried the bucket with more strength than she'd had in previous days. The cold metal handle pressed into her palms, but she didn't falter. Adam watched her lift it without offering unnecessary assistance. "You don't hesitate as much anymore," he noted. "I'm learning what I can do," she replied. "Seems like a lot." She paused at his remark, realizing it wasn't flattery, it was observation. She had been trying to blend into the background for so long that rediscovering her own capability felt like stepping into the sun after years of shadow. Later in the afternoon, she washed Adam's coat by the creek. The icy water stung her fingers, but she endured it, wanting the garment that had protected her to be clean again. She sat on the grass to dry. When Adam saw the coat laid out neatly, his brows lifted slightly. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I wanted to." He didn't argue. Instead, he moved closer and inspected her hands, noticing how red they'd become. He didn't touch them, but examined them with a seriousness that surprised her. "Water's cold this time of year," he murmured. "I'll warm them by the fire." "You should." Inside, she sat beside the stove, letting the heat soak into her skin. Adam placed another log into the flame, making sure the fire stayed strong. She watched him work, feeling something unfamiliar but steady rising inside her, a sense that he wasn't doing these things out of duty, but out of quiet regard. That evening, they shared a rare moment of closeness. She was seated near the fire, brushing her hair with slow, careful strokes. Adam sat at the table whittling a small piece of wood into a smooth shape. He wasn't carving anything in particular. It was simply something to keep his hands busy. He noticed her hair falling over her shoulder and glanced briefly, then looked away before it could make her uncomfortable. "You've changed the cabin," he said after a long pause. She looked up. "How so?" "Feels different. Lived in. Balanced." Her breath caught slightly. "You don't mind?" Adam shook his head. "No, it's better." She set the brush down slowly, absorbing the meaning behind his simple words. She wasn't a visitor anymore. She wasn't a burden. She had shaped this place, and he welcomed it. Before turning in for the night, she opened the door and stepped outside for a moment. The sky had deepened into a muted purple, stars appearing one by one. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked at the land stretching quietly in every direction. For the first time in years, she didn't wonder where she would go next. She wondered what tomorrow might hold, here with him. And that new thought settled deep inside her, warm and frightening and hopeful all at once. The following morning arrived softer than any before it. A faint mist clung to the ground, lifting slowly as the sun rose behind the distant ridge. She stepped outside to feel the cool air on her face, her breath forming small clouds that drifted away before dissolving. The land looked peaceful, untouched, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine belonging to a place rather than surviving one. Inside the cabin, Adam tied the lace of his boots with deliberate focus. He had made a decision long before dawn, a decision that had tightened in his chest throughout the night. He wasn't a man who acted impulsively, yet the thought of leaving things unspoken had begun to bother him more than he expected. Today had to mean something. He pulled on his coat and stepped out onto the porch. "I'm riding to town," he said. She stiffened. "Did something happen?" "No trouble," he assured her. "Just something I need to take care of." Her stomach tightened with unease. "Will you be gone long?" "Not too long," he answered, meeting her eyes directly. "Stay near the cabin." She nodded, though she didn't like the unfamiliar ache rising beneath her ribs. After he mounted the mare and rode off, she stood in the yard until he disappeared beyond the rise. The quiet that followed felt heavier than usual. She returned to her chores to steady herself, sweeping the porch, preparing the stove for midday, organizing the shelf of dried herbs. But her thoughts drifted constantly to the road, wondering what he was doing, wondering why today felt different. Hours passed before the sound of hooves returned, slow and sure along the familiar path. She stepped outside, heart racing despite herself. Adam dismounted with a cautious calm she hadn't seen before. Something in his posture had changed, not tense, but purposeful. He held a small wrapped bundle in one hand. She approached him slowly. "What's that?" He placed the bundle in her hands. "Open it." Her fingers trembled as she loosened the twine. Inside lay a simple dress the color of warm earth, a pair of sturdy shoes, and a small wooden box with a polished tin ring nestled inside. She stared at the contents without speaking, the breath caught in her throat. "I went to town for this," Adam said quietly. "Figured I shouldn't keep holding back what needed saying." She lifted her eyes, overwhelmed. Why bring these to me?" Adam stepped closer, his voice steady, but carrying more emotion than she had ever heard from him. "You said you didn't know where you belonged. You said you wanted to choose your name, your future, your place. I want you to know you can choose this too." He paused, searching her expression. "I want you here, not because you owe me, not because you needed shelter, because life feels different with you in it." Her hands tightened around the dress. "Are you asking me to stay for good?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "If that's what you want. If not, I'll ride you wherever you choose to go. But I'm hoping you'll stay. With me." Her breath shook, but not from fear. She looked down at the ring. Simple, modest, undeniably sincere. No one had ever offered her something chosen freely. No one had ever given her the power to say yes or no. She closed the wooden box gently and stepped closer until she stood inches from him. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Not now. Not ever." His shoulders eased, as if a weight he had carried for years finally loosened. She held out her hand. Adam slipped the ring on her finger with careful precision. The symbol small, but meaningful. Two lives joining not through rescue, but through choice. She inhaled sharply, overwhelmed by the certainty settling into her chest. "I want this," she said. "I want us." Adam didn't pull her into an embrace. He simply reached for her hand and held it firmly, allowing the moment to deepen at its own pace. The gesture was enough, more than enough. They walked back toward the cabin together, step by steady step, neither rushing the moment. She glanced at the dress folded in her arms, imagining herself wearing it, imagining meals shared at the table, imagining mornings without fear or uncertainty. She felt something deep inside settling into place. When they reached the porch, Adam paused. "You can choose your name whenever you're ready," he reminded her. "But whatever you decide, this home is yours now, too." Tears pooled briefly in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She squeezed his hand. "I'll choose when it's time. For now, I just want to feel this." Adam nodded, and together they stepped inside the cabin. Not as strangers, not as temporary companions, but as two people who had chosen each other in quiet, deliberate unity. That evening, as the fire warmed the room and the ring caught the glow of the lamplight, she rested her hand in his without fear. The cabin felt complete in a way it never had before. Two lives, once broken in separate corners of the world, had found steady ground. Not through grand declarations, not through obligation, but through staying and choosing together.